The air was thick with the scent of synthetic alcohol and the sound of multiple alien languages blending together. In a cacophony of conversation, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision as he cleaned his rifle. The weapon was old by Galactic standards, a primitive projectile-based firearm that most of the advanced alien species considered obsolete. Yet Jeho treated it with the care of a master craftsman, each component receiving meticulous attention as he disassembled, cleaned and reassembled the mechanism with fluid movements born from years of repetition. At the center of the cantina, a group of alien warriors had gathered around the largest table, their voices growing louder and more animated as the synthetic alcohol flowed freely. The group represented some of the most fearsome species in the Galactic Defense Coalition. Each one a veteran of countless battles across the Outer Rim territories. Dexmar, a towering Krathri warrior, dominated the conversation with his imposing presence. His four muscular arms gestured wildly as he spoke, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh artificial lighting. The mandibles around his mouth clicked and clattered with each word, creating a sound that resembled a mix between insect communication and mechanical grinding. Humans and their pathetic war stories, Dexmar declared, his voice carrying easily. Across the cantina, they speak of battles where 300 of their kind held off thousands of enemies. What complete fantasy! No rational species would believe such obvious fabrications. His mandibles clattered with amusement as he took a long drink from a specialized feeding tube, the liquid disappearing into his alien digestive system. The other warriors around the table nodded in agreement. An ethereal Veltar, with translucent skin that seemed to shimmer with internal light, closed his large, dark eyes and projected his thoughts directly into the minds of those around him. The telepathic communication felt like a cool breeze against consciousness, carrying words without the need for vocal cords or mechanical translators. Their myths of lone warriors defeating entire armies are clearly psychological compensation. For battlefield inadequacy, his mental voice resonated in the minds of his listeners. Every species develops coping mechanisms for their limitations, but humans have elevated self-deception to an art form. Captain Vexian, a reptilian Sarok with scales that shifted color based on her emotional state, hissed her agreement. Her forked tongue flicked out to taste the air, a habit that made many other species uncomfortable. Currently, her scales displayed a mottled pattern of deep green and brown, indicating her amusement at the conversation. Every engagement I have witnessed involving human forces tells the same story, she continued, her voice carrying a sibilant quality that made her words sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. They require the most medical support, suffer the highest casualty rates, and their so-called berserker stories are nothing more than elaborate excuses for their inherent weaknesses. The conversation continued to flow around the table with each alien warrior contributing their own observations about human military incompetence. They spoke of battles where human forces had broken ranks and fled, of commanders who had made tactical errors that cost countless lives, and of a species that seemed to rely more on luck than skill to survive their encounters with truly dangerous opponents. Lieutenant Krivax, a young Jex warrior whose insectoid features marked him as one of the newest additions to the base, buzzed with excitement as he listened to the stories. His compound eyes reflected the light in dozens of different directions, creating a kaleidoscope effect that was both mesmerizing and slightly unsettling. The Jex were known for their collective intelligence, with individual members serving as nodes in a vast hive mind that could process information at incredible speeds. I have accessed the historical databases, Krivax announced, his voice coming through a mechanical translator that gave his words a distinctive electronic quality. The humans claim that their ancestors once fought with primitive. They speak of warriors who felt no pain, who never retreated, who could fight for days without rest. Such claims are biologically impossible. The laughter that followed was not kind. It carried the harsh edge of species that had earned their place in the galaxy through superior evolution, advanced technology, and proven battlefield superiority. To them, humans were a recent addition to the galactic community. Jeho remained focused on his weapon maintenance, his movements never faltering despite the increasingly hostile tone of the conversation. His face, marked by scars that told stories of battles fought in the darkest corners of space, remained impassive as he listened to the aliens dissect and dismiss his species' military heritage. The mockery continued to escalate. With each warrior trying to outdo the others in their creative interpretations of human military failures, they spoke of cowardice disguised as tactics, of retreat presented as strategic repositioning, and of a species that had somehow fooled the galaxy into believing they deserved a place among the stars. It was Lieutenant Kryvax who finally noticed. The silent human in the corner, his compound eyes focusing on the lone figure with sudden interest. Perhaps it was the collective curiosity of the hive mind, or maybe it was simply the arrogance of youth. But the young Jex warrior decided to make the human the direct target of their entertainment. "Tell us," human Kryvax buzzed through his translator, his voice carrying across the cantina with electronic precision. "Do you actually believe these fairy tales your species tells about itself?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and suddenly all conversation in the cantina ceased. Every alien warrior turned to look at the human in the corner, their various sensory organs focusing on him with predatory intensity. The silence stretched for several heartbeats, broken only by the mechanical hum of the base's life support systems. Jeho slowly raised his head from his rifle, his dark eyes meeting the compound gaze of the young Jex warrior. His weathered face remained completely impassive, showing no sign of anger or offense at the question. Instead, there was something almost curious in his expression, as if he was genuinely interested in the challenge that had been presented to him. "Which story would you like to hear about?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying easily across the silent cantina despite its soft tone. The tension in the cantina was thick enough to cut with a blade as the alien warriors processed the human's unexpected response. They had expected anger, defensive arguments, or perhaps the typical human emotional outburst they had witnessed in previous encounters. Instead, Jeho's calm demeanor and simple question had completely shifted the dynamic of the conversation. Dexmar was the first to recover from the surprise, his massive frame trembling with what could only be described as indignation. The four-armed Krathari warrior had never been challenged so directly by what he considered an inferior species. His chitinous plates scraped against each other as he leaned forward, and with a thunderous crash, he brought all four of his fists down on the metal table simultaneously. The sound reverberated through the cantina like a gunshot, causing several smaller species to instinctively duck for cover. Table, made of reinforced military-grade alloy, dented under the impact but held together. Empty drinking containers bounced and clattered to the floor, their contents spilling across the deck. Plating, any of them. Dexmar roared, his mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. "Pick your most ridiculous myth. Tell us about your impossible heroes and their fantasy victories." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down in an ancient arena. Every eye in the cantina was now fixed on the human sergeant, waiting to see how he would respond to this direct confrontation. The ambient noise of the base seemed to fade away, leaving only the steady hum of the environmental systems and the barely audible breathing of dozens of different species. Jeho remained seated, his hands continuing their methodical work on his rifle even as he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than responding to a challenge that could determine the respect his entire species commanded on this base. "How about 28 men holding off 2,000? For an entire day?" he asked, his tone carrying no trace of boastfulness or aggression. The Battle of Cameroon, where French Foreign Legion soldiers fought Mexican forces until only 5 men remained alive. Or perhaps you would prefer the story of a single sniper eliminating 500 enemies in 100 days during the coldest winter in recorded history. The specificity of his examples caught the aliens off guard. These were not vague boasts or generalized claims of human superiority. Jeho was citing specific battles, specific numbers, specific historical events that could potentially be verified through the vast databases available to the galactic community. Commander Zephyros, intrigued by the human's confidence, decided to employ his species' greatest advantage. The Veltar were renowned throughout the galaxy for their telepathic abilities, capable of reading surface thoughts and emotions with ease. Closing his large, dark eyes, he extended his consciousness toward the human's mind, expecting to find the usual mixture of bravado and underlying fear that characterized most species when challenged. Instead, he encountered something entirely unexpected. The moment his telepathic probe touched the edges of Jeho's consciousness, it was met by a wall of neural conditioning so sophisticated and powerful that it felt like striking solid steel. The mental barriers were not natural, but had been constructed through advanced military techniques that the FLTAR had never encountered before. What little emotional resonance managed to slip through the conditioning was even more disturbing than the barriers themselves. There was no fear, no uncertainty, no trace of the deception that Zephyros had expected to find. Instead, there was a cold, calculating certainty that suggested the human genuinely believed he could accomplish what he was claiming. The telepathic recoil was so severe that Zephyros physically jerked backward, his translucent skin flickering. With patterns of distress, several of the other warriors noticed his reaction, their own confidence beginning to waver as they witnessed the normally unflappable Veltar commander's obvious discomfort. Captain Vection, her reptilian instincts, attuned to the subtle shifts in group dynamics, was the first to voice what many of the aliens were beginning to think. Her scales had shifted to a more muted pattern, indicating uncertainty and growing concern about the direction the conversation was taking. "Impossible," she hissed, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air for chemical traces of deception. No organic being could achieve such feats without technological enhancement. Your species lacks the physical capabilities, the neural processing speed, and the biological durability required for such accomplishments. The scientific certainty in her voice was absolute, backed by millennia of galactic research into the capabilities and limitations of different species. The databases were clear. Humans were average in most physical categories, below average in others, and their only notable advantage was a certain unpredictability that made them difficult to predict in tactical situations. Jeho slowly rose. From his seat, his movements deliberate and controlled. The simple action somehow commanded the attention of every being in the cantina, as if his mere presence had grown more significant with each passing moment. His weathered hands secured his rifle to his back with practiced efficiency, and when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that cut through the ambient noise. "You want proof?" I asked, his dark eyes scanning the assembled alien warriors. "Tomorrow, at 0800 hours, main training grounds, I'll show you what one supposedly mythical human can actually accomplish." The challenge was simple, direct, and completely unexpected. The aliens had been prepared for arguments, for emotional outbursts, for defensive explanations about human military tactics. They had not been prepared for a direct offer to demonstrate the very capabilities they had been mocking. The initial response was predictable. Laughter erupted from the alien warriors, but there was something different about it now. The earlier mockery had been casual and dismissive, the kind of humor that came from a position of absolute certainty. This laughter carried an edge of nervousness, as if the aliens were laughing to convince themselves as much as to mock the human. Vexmar, still smarting from the unexpected turn of events, was quick to accept what he saw as an opportunity to definitively prove human inferiority. His mandibles clicked with renewed confidence as he formulated what he believed would be an insurmountable challenge. "Very well, human," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Combat simulation. You against 50% of our best warriors. When you inevitably fail, you will publicly admit that your species' stories are nothing more than elaborate lies designed to compensate for your obvious inadequacies." The terms seemed reasonable to the assembled aliens. 50 experienced warriors from various species, each with their own unique advantages and specialized training, against a single human armed with primitive weapons. It was not just a challenge, but a mathematical certainty of human defeat. Jeho considered the proposal for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. When he spoke, his words sent a chill through the cantina that had nothing to do with the environmental systems. "Make it 100, he said quietly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. and I'll use period-appropriate equipment. No modern enhancements, no powered armor, no energy weapons. Just the tools my ancestors used when they created. Those myths you find so amusing. The laughter died completely, cut off as if someone had activated a sound dampener. The human was not just accepting an impossible challenge, but actively making it more difficult for himself. The alien stared at him in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they had just heard. The human was not joking. The news of the challenge spread through forward operating base Nexus with the speed and intensity of a plasma fire. Within hours of the cantina confrontation, every corridor buzzed with whispered conversations in dozens of different languages. Soldiers who had never spoken to each other before found themselves huddled together, discussing the impossible wager that had been made between the human sergeant and the alien warriors. In the command center, Colonel Yarbeth sat behind her. Curved desk, her pale Veltar features illuminated by the soft glow of multiple data screens. The telepathic commander had been reviewing standard personnel files when the initial reports reached her. But what she discovered when she accessed Staff Sergeant Kim Jaho's service record made her pause her other duties entirely. The file was heavily encrypted, with security clearances that exceeded even her own command authority. Most of the document was redacted, showing only black bars where crucial information should have been displayed.
However,
what little information was available painted a picture that made the colonel's translucent skin flicker with patterns of deep concern. Multiple commendations for valor stretched across 15 years of active service. Deployments to every major conflict zone in the Outer Rim territories, often in situations where other species had declared missions impossible or too dangerous to attempt. The psychological evaluation conducted by the military's best xenopsychologists contained phrases that seemed almost contradictory when applied to what most considered an average human soldier. The words unbreakable mental fortitude and weaponized determination appeared repeatedly throughout the assessment. There were references to neural modifications, experimental treatments, and psychological conditioning that went far beyond standard military training. Most disturbing of all was a notation that classified Jaho as functionally post-human. In terms of stress response and pain tolerance, Colonel Yarbeth had commanded mixed species units for over 2 decades, and she had never encountered a personnel file quite like this one. The combination of heavy classification and the few available details suggested that the human sergeant was far more than he appeared to be. Meanwhile, in the alien barracks complex, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and excitement. Word had spread quickly through the military hierarchy, and volunteers had stepped forward faster than the organizers could process them. What had started as a simple challenge had evolved into the most significant military demonstration the base had witnessed in years. The Krathri warriors had claimed the largest training chamber, where they spent hours testing their plasma weaponry against various target configurations. Dexmar led the group through complex firing drills, his forearms moving in perfect coordination as he demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of their energy-based armaments. The chitinous warriors practiced suppression tactics, crossfire patterns, and coordinated assaults that had proven effective against enemy forces across multiple star systems in the adjacent training area. The Sarok contingent worked on their specialized ambush techniques. Captain Vection directed her reptilian soldiers through camouflage exercises, teaching them to blend seamlessly with the varied terrain that would be available during the simulation. Their natural ability to change skin coloration was enhanced by advanced optical camouflage systems that could render them nearly invisible to most detection methods. The Jex Collective had commandeered the tactical planning room, where dozens of insectoid warriors linked their minds in a complex hive network that could process battlefield information at superhuman speeds. Lieutenant Kryvak served as one of the primary nodes, his compound eyes reflecting the glow of holographic battle displays as the collective mind analyzed thousands of possible tactical scenarios. Each alien species brought their own unique advantages to the challenge. The Veltar could coordinate through telepathic communication that was impossible to intercept. The Murden had modified their environmental suits to provide enhanced mobility and protection. Even the normally peaceful crystalline entities had volunteered. Their silicon-based bodies capable of withstanding damage that would destroy organic tissue. The confidence among the alien volunteers was absolute. They had trained together for months, knew each other's capabilities intimately, and possessed technological advantages that seemed insurmountable. Against a single human with primitive weapons, victory appeared mathematically certain. However, in the human quarters, the mood was considerably more subdued. Corporal Park Min-ji, the unit's primary combat medic, sat beside Jae-ho's bunk as she performed routine maintenance on his cybernetic arm. The artificial limb was a masterpiece of medical engineering, but it required constant attention to prevent rejection by his biological systems. Min-ji's hands were gentle but efficient, as she cleaned the neural interface ports that connected the mechanical components to Jae-ho's nervous system. The scars surrounding the connection points told stories of battles fought in the darkest corners of space, each mark a testament to the violence he had survived. "They're not wrong about our casualty rates," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many humans carried off battlefields. "We're good soldiers, but we're not superhuman. We bleed, we break, we die, just like any other species." Jae-ho sat motionless during the maintenance procedure. His dark eyes focused on the rifle he was field stripping for what seemed like the 100th time that day. Each component was cleaned with obsessive precision. Every mechanism tested and retested until it functioned with perfect reliability. "Speak for yourself," he replied, his voice carrying a quiet certainty that made Min-ji pause in her work. "They're not fighting humans tomorrow. They're fighting a human. There's a difference." The distinction seemed subtle, but something in his tone suggested a deeper meaning that the medic could not quite grasp. She had served alongside Jae-ho for 3 years, treated his wounds and monitored his health. But there were aspects of his service record that remained classified even from medical personnel. As night fell over the base, most of the alien volunteers retired to their quarters, confident in their preparation and certain of victory. The human barracks were largely empty, with most personnel avoiding their sergeant as if his presence carried some form of contagion. Jae-ho made his way to the base's cultural archive, a vast digital library that contained historical records from every member species of the Galactic Defense Coalition. The facility was empty at this hour, illuminated only by the soft glow of access terminals and the steady hum of data storage systems. He began with the records most of the galaxy considered mythology. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartan warriors held off Persian forces that outnumbered them by thousands to one. The winter war exploits of Simo He, the Finnish sniper who eliminated over 500 enemy soldiers in conditions that should have been impossible for human survival. Guerrilla tactics throughout human history that had allowed small forces to defeat technologically superior enemies. Each record was studied with the intensity of a student, preparing for the most important examination of his life. Jae-ho absorbed tactical details, psychological factors, and environmental conditions that had contributed to these legendary victories. To most observers, these would seem like desperate attempts to find inspiration in ancient stories. However, Jae-ho then accessed files that were definitely not part of the public record. His security clearance opened classified databases that contained information most humans were never meant to see. Project Lazarus appeared on his screen, its designation alone carrying implications that made his jaw tighten with remembered pain. The experimental program had been designed to push human limitations beyond their theoretical breaking points. Neural interfaces, combat stimulants, pain suppressors, and tactical analysis systems that could enhance human capabilities to levels that approached the supernatural. The scars on his arm were not merely from combat injuries but from the surgical procedures that had forever altered his biology. Only 12 humans had survived the complete Lazarus treatment. The others had died during the process or suffered complete psychological breakdown when their enhanced capabilities proved too much for unmodified human minds to handle. Jae-ho was one of the survivors, a living weapon created by human ingenuity and desperation. Tomorrow, the aliens would discover what happened when human mythology met human science. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground as the entire base population gathered to witness what many expected would be the most one-sided military demonstration in recent memory. The massive arena had been transformed overnight into a complex urban warfare environment, complete with multi-story buildings, interconnected trenches, scattered debris fields, and natural rock formations that created countless hiding spots and ambush points. Colonel Yarbith stood on the elevated observation platform, her pale Veltar features tense as she surveyed the assembled crowd. Military personnel from every species represented on the base had found vantage points around the arena's perimeter. The betting pools had been running all night, with odds heavily favoring the alien coalition. Some wagers reached absurd extremes, with certain species offering 100-to-1 odds against the human success. The 100 alien volunteers had spent the early morning hours positioning themselves throughout the arena with military precision. Krathri warriors claimed the high ground, their forearms allowing them to operate multiple weapons simultaneously while maintaining superior firing positions. Sirach ambush specialists had already vanished into the environment, their chameleon abilities rendering them nearly invisible against the varied terrain. Gex collective units established overlapping fields of fire, their hive mind coordination allowing them to respond to threats with superhuman speed and accuracy. Veltar telepaths took strategic positions that would allow them to coordinate the entire force through mental communication. Murden warriors in their environmental suits occupied the underground tunnel systems, while crystalline entities used their silicon-based bodies to blend with the rocky outcroppings. The alien formation was a masterpiece of tactical planning, incorporating the unique advantages of each species into a unified defense that seemed absolutely impenetrable. Every approach to the extraction point had been covered by multiple overlapping fields of fire, with backup positions already established in case the humans somehow broke through the initial defensive lines. At exactly 0800 hours, Staff Sergeant Kim Jae-ho walked onto the arena floor. His appearance was almost anticlimactic after the elaborate preparations made by his opponents. He wore standard military fatigues with no armor or protective gear beyond a simple helmet. His equipment loadout consisted of his aging rifle, 6 magazines of training, ammunition, a combat knife, basic field gear, and a small pack containing water and emergency medical supplies. The contrast between his simple equipment and the advanced technology wielded by the alien forces was stark. While his opponents carried plasma weapons, energy shields, and sophisticated targeting systems, Jae-ho looked like a soldier from a primitive era who had somehow stumbled into a futuristic battlefield. Colonel Yarbeth activated the arena's communication system, her telepathic voice reaching every mind present. The rules were straightforward. Elimination occurred when training rounds registered 3 hits on target sensors. The aliens must prevent Jae-ho from reaching the extraction point located 5 kilometers away on the opposite side of the arena. Time limit was set at 2 hours, which most observers considered generous to the point of absurdity. The simulation began with the sound of an electronic tone that echoed across the arena. Jae-ho immediately moved toward the nearest building, his movements fluid and economical as he sought cover from the inevitable barrage that would follow. The alien forces held their fire, waiting for him to expose himself in a way that would allow for easy elimination. For the first 30 minutes, the engagement proceeded exactly as the observers had expected. Jae-ho moved from cover to cover, with impressive tactical awareness, using buildings and terrain features to shield himself from the alien weapons. When opportunities presented themselves, he fired with remarkable accuracy, eliminating several alien warriors who had exposed themselves while attempting to flank his position. His marksmanship was undeniably impressive. Each shot was carefully aimed and deliberately placed, with very little ammunition wasted on suppressive fire or hasty engagements. The alien forces began to respect his skill, but their confidence remained unshaken. He was obviously a competent soldier, but competence alone could not overcome the mathematical reality of his situation. The alien commanders coordinated their forces through telepathic communication, gradually tightening their defensive perimeter and forcing Jae-ho into increasingly difficult positions. Krathri plasma bolts filled the air around his cover positions, Sorok ambush teams attempted to catch him during his movements between buildings. Then, at approximately the 30-minute mark, something fundamental changed about Jeho's behavior. The shift was subtle at first, noticed only by the most observant spectators, but it quickly became impossible to ignore. His movements became more fluid, more precise, as if he had suddenly gained access to information that was not available to normal senses. Crathery plasma bolts that should have found their target consistently missed by impossibly small margins. Jeho would move fractionally to one side, just as energy beams passed through the space his body had occupied milliseconds earlier. The alien warriors initially attributed this to luck, but the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. Sorok camouflage specialists, masters of concealment, who had successfully hidden from enemy forces across multiple star systems, found themselves detected and eliminated before they could spring their ambushes. Jeho seemed to know exactly where they were hiding, even when their optical camouflage rendered them invisible to normal vision. The Jex Collective, with their superhuman coordination and information processing capabilities, watched in growing alarm as their carefully planned attacks fell apart. Jeho exploited microscopic gaps in their timing, striking during the brief moments when their hive mind coordination was shifting between different tactical configurations. His accuracy became supernatural. Every shot found its target, even when firing from impossible angles or while moving at full speed. Alien warriors who had never been eliminated in training exercises found themselves tagged by training rounds that seemed to curve through the air to reach them. When his ammunition finally ran out, the alien forces expected him to surrender, or at least request a tactical pause. Instead, Jeho holstered his empty rifle and drew his combat knife with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed. Simple blade, constructed from basic steel alloy, suddenly became the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield. The transformation was complete. Jeho moved through the arena like a ghost, appearing in locations that should have been impossible to reach undetected. He used the aliens' own weapons against them, turning their advanced technology into tools for their own elimination. Their numerical advantage became a liability as he moved through their ranks. Using their positions against each other, alien warriors who had fought in dozens of battles found themselves paralyzed by something they had never experienced before: genuine fear. The human was no longer behaving like a normal organic being, but like some kind of unstoppable force that had taken human form. By the 90-minute mark, 73 alien warriors had been eliminated. Jeho had not taken a single hit. Remaining 27 defenders were no longer fighting to win, but simply trying to survive until the time limit expired. Their confidence had been replaced by terror as they realized they were facing something that existed outside their understanding of biological limitations. The simulation ended when Jeho reached the extraction point with 11 minutes remaining on the clock. He had eliminated 87 of the 100 opponents while sustaining 0 damage to himself. The final 13 survivors were found huddled in defensive positions, too shaken to continue fighting. The arena fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems. The hours following the demonstration passed in strange silence that seemed to blanket the entire base like a heavy fog. The usual sounds of military activity continued, but there was an underlying tension that affected every conversation and interaction. Word of what had happened in the training arena spread through the corridors in whispers, with each telling adding new details that made the event seem even more impossible. When Jeho finally entered the cantina, the atmosphere was completely different from the boisterous environment that had existed just 24 hours earlier. The same aliens who had filled the space with mocking laughter now sat in small groups, their voices subdued and their body language reflecting a mixture of confusion and something that resembled fear. His uniform told the story of the mornings. Events better than any official report could have done. The fabric was torn in several places where he had moved through tight spaces or brushed against rough surfaces. Dark stains marked areas where minor cuts had bled, evidence of the physical cost of his superhuman performance. Despite these signs of the battle he had just fought, his demeanor remained as calm and controlled as it had been before the demonstration. The alien warriors who had gathered around the large table now found themselves unable to meet his eyes directly. These were beings who had faced death in countless battles across the galaxy, who had earned their positions through demonstrated courage and skill. Yet something about the quiet human who walked to the bar and ordered his usual synthetic whiskey made them feel like children who had wandered into a conversation meant for adults. Vexmar, the massive Krathri warrior who had been the most vocal critic of human military capabilities, sat hunched over his drinking apparatus. His forearms, which had gestured so confidently during the previous evening's mockery, now seemed to have trouble coordinating simple movements. The chitinous plates that covered his body had lost their usual lustrous sheen, appearing dull and somehow diminished as Jeho received his drink from the automated dispenser. Daxmar slowly rose from his seat and approached the bar. His movements were hesitant, completely unlike the aggressive confidence he had displayed during their earlier encounter. When he spoke, his voice had lost its commanding presence, reduced to barely more than a whisper. "How?" he asked, the single word carrying the weight of his shattered understanding of the universe. "How is such a thing possible?" Joho turned to face the alien warrior, his expression thoughtful as he considered the question. He took a slow sip of his synthetic whiskey, the amber liquid reflecting the cantina's artificial lighting. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the patience of someone explaining a complex concept to a student. "You want to know the difference between human myths and alien logic?" he began, his words measured and deliberate. "You calculate odds, analyze statistics, run probability assessments, and conclude that victory is mathematically improbable or even impossible." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "But humans don't fight mathematics. We fight reality. When 300 Spartans faced 1,000,000 Persians at Thermopylae, they didn't calculate their chances of survival. They decided that some things were worth dying for, that the defense of their homeland was more important than personal survival." The cantina had fallen completely silent now, with every alien present listening intently to his explanation. Species that had never shown interest in human history found themselves captivated by the simple way. He described events that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. When farmers with hunting rifles fought the British Empire, they didn't study the odds or analyze the mathematical probability of success, Jeho continued. They decided they would rather die as free beings than live as slaves. That decision changed everything about how they fought. Commander Zephyros, who had been sitting alone at a corner table since the demonstration ended, slowly approached the group. His telepathic abilities were still recovering from the contact he had made with Jeho's enhanced mind during the battle. The experience had left him with a splitting headache and a fundamental questioning of everything he thought he knew about human psychology. "But you're not like other humans," the Veltar commander said, his telepathic voice carrying undertones of confusion and growing fear. "What are you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Jeho's expression grew darker as he considered how much to reveal about his true nature. His fingers unconsciously traced the scars on his cybernetic arm, the neural interface, points that connected his biological nervous system to technologies that most humans could never tolerate. "And what happens when you take human stubbornness and add military science?" he said finally, his voice carrying a weight that suggested painful memories. "Project Lazarus was designed to create the next evolution of human warfare. We were supposed to be the ultimate soldiers, capable of pushing human limitations beyond their theoretical breaking points." He took another sip of his drink before continuing, his words becoming more personal and revealing. 12 of us survived the complete treatment process. The others died during the enhancement procedures or suffered complete psychological breakdown when their unmodified minds couldn't handle the increased capabilities. The aliens listening to his explanation found themselves struggling to comprehend the implications of what he was describing. The idea that humans would voluntarily subject themselves to potentially lethal procedures in order to become more effective warriors was both fascinating and terrifying. "We're not better than other humans," Jeho continued, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been sadness. "We're just more human, more stubborn, more willing to fight impossible odds, more capable of pushing past what should be our limits." The enhancements didn't change our fundamental nature. They just amplified what was already there. Lieutenant Kryvax, the young Jex warrior who had originally challenged J-Ho in the cantina, finally found the courage to speak. His compound eyes reflected the ambient light in dozens of different directions as he processed the information. Through his collective consciousness, "Your myths," he said, his electronic translator, giving his words a mechanical quality that somehow made them more poignant. "They're not myths, are they?" J-Ho's response was immediate and certain. "No," he said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "They're warnings. Every story about impossible human victories is a reminder that when we decide something is worth fighting for, mathematics becomes irrelevant. You can kill humans, but you can't make us quit." The profound silence that followed his words was broken by the sound of the cantina's main door opening. Colonel Yarbeth entered, her pale Veltar features set in an expression of grim determination. Her telepathic presence carried undertones of urgency and concern that immediately caught the attention of every being in the room. "Staff Sergeant?" "Kim," she said, her voice carrying the authority of command mixed with something that might have been respect. "We've just received word through quantum communication channels. The hegemony has broken the ceasefire agreement. Their forces are moving on the Tau Ceti colonies." The news hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. Hegemony was known throughout the galaxy for their ruthless efficiency and complete disregard for civilian casualties. If they had decided to break the fragile peace that had existed for the past 6 months, it meant that total war was once again about to engulf the Outer Rim territories. J-Ho finished his drink in one smooth motion and stood, movements carrying the same fluid precision that had characterized his performance in the training arena. "Then I guess it's time to get back to work," he said simply. As he moved toward the exit, something unprecedented happened. The alien warriors who had mocked him just 24 hours earlier began to rise from their seats and follow him. Smar was the first to catch up, his massive frame moving with surprising speed despite his obvious nervousness. "Sergeant," the Krathri warrior said, his voice carrying a note of desperate hope. "Request permission to serve under your command." J-Ho paused at the threshold of the cantina, turning to face the assembled aliens who had gathered behind him. His expression was serious as he considered the implications of their request. "This is going to be ugly," he warned them, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much combat. "The hegemony doesn't take prisoners, and they don't honor surrender. If you follow me, some of you won't be coming back." Captain Vection, her reptilian features set in an expression of fierce determination, hissed her response. "Then we'll show them what we learned from human mythology." J-Ho looked around at the assembled warriors, representatives of 6 different species who had been united by witnessing what humans called impossible. For the first time in days, he smiled. "Then," he said, his voice carrying a note of quiet satisfaction, "let's go prove some more myths."